Imagine this. You're scrolling through your phone at 3 a.m., absorbing countless fragments of information, a political headline, a scientific claim, a celebrity scandal, a medical breakthrough. Your thumb moves mechanically as your eyes scan hundreds of words, images, and videos. In this moment, you feel oddly powerful, connected to the world's knowledge, aware of developments across continents, privy to the thoughts of millions. You've consumed more information in this mindless hour than your ancestors might have encountered in months, perhaps years. Now pause. What do you actually know? Can you explain the political conflict beyond its polarizing headline? Can you evaluate the validity of that scientific study? Do you understand the cultural context behind that viral video? Or have you merely collected shadows, thin imprints of knowledge that dissolve under scrutiny? We live in the greatest paradox of human history, drowning in information while starving for wisdom. We mistake exposure for understanding, awareness for insight, access for mastery. The digital age has gifted us infinite knowledge at our fingertips, yet simultaneously engineered a profound form of ignorance, one that feels precisely like enlightenment. This is not just about misinformation or fake news. This is about something far more insidious: the growing inability to recognize the boundaries of our own understanding. The more information we encounter, the more our brains create illusory webs of comprehension, connecting disparate facts into a tapestry that feels coherent but lacks foundation. Think about it. When was the last time you truly learned something? Not collected a fact, not nodded along with an explanation, but fundamentally altered your model of reality. When did you last sit with an idea long enough to feel its weight, its edges, its contradictions? What if our presumed knowledge is actually the barrier to true understanding? What if the greatest threat to human wisdom isn't ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge? The answer lies buried in the architecture of your mind, in the hidden forces that have transformed how you process reality itself, and in what you've unknowingly surrendered in exchange for infinite information. This illusion of knowledge isn't merely a quirk of the information age, it's rooted in the very architecture of the human mind, amplified by technologies designed to exploit our cognitive vulnerabilities. Friedrich Nietzsche foresaw this crisis over a century ago. The most common form of human stupidity is forgetting what one is trying to do. In our digital ecosystem, we've forgotten that the purpose of knowledge isn't accumulation but transformation. We collect information not to reshape our understanding, but to reinforce what we already believe we know. This is what Carl Jung would recognize as the shadow of knowledge, the dark counterpart to genuine understanding that grows alongside our information consumption. The philosopher Schopenhauer offers us another key. Reading is merely a substitute for thinking for yourself. The digital age has perfected this substitution. Each notification, each headline, each thread of comments provides the sensation of thought without its substance. We outsource the arduous work of contemplation to algorithms that serve us pre-digested conclusions. The result is a peculiar form of learned helplessness, an atrophy of our meaning-making faculties. Consider what happens neurologically when you encounter information online. Your brain releases a small dopamine reward for each new piece of data, an evolutionary mechanism intended to encourage exploration and learning. But in the infinite scroll of the digital landscape, this system becomes hijacked. You're no longer pursuing knowledge, you're chasing the next dopamine hit. The medium has subverted the message. Jean-Paul Sartre would recognize our condition as a form of bad faith, a self-deception where we pretend to have agency while surrendering to the passive consumption of information. We tell ourselves we're researching or staying informed, when in reality, we're being shaped by forces we barely comprehend. This creates what Viktor Frankl would call an existential vacuum, a void of meaning disguised as abundance. We accumulate facts but lose the narrative thread that binds them into wisdom. We gain information but forfeit understanding. The most insidious aspect of this problem is the Dunning-Kruger effect, the cognitive bias, where the less we know about a subject, the more confident we become in our mastery of it. The digital age has democratized this effect. With a few searches, anyone can acquire the language and surface patterns of expertise without its substance. We've created a world where everyone feels qualified to debate everything, yet few possess the depth to understand anything fully. Aldous Huxley's warning becomes prophetic. That men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons of history. Despite unprecedented access to human knowledge, we repeat the same patterns of thought, the same cognitive errors, the same mistaking of the map for the territory. This illusion of knowledge operates like a virus in our collective consciousness. It replicates itself through social validation, the likes, and shares that reward not depth but conformity, not insight but recognition. Our social media platforms become echo chambers not simply because they show us what we agree with, but because they transform agreement itself into a proxy for truth. The result is a society drowning in pseudo-knowledge information without integration, facts without frameworks, data without discernment. And the true danger isn't what we don't know, it's what we think we know that simply isn't so. But the consequences of this illusion extend far beyond individual cognition. They reshape our social fabric, our politics, and our very sense of reality itself. The illusion of knowledge doesn't merely distort your personal reality, it warps the collective consciousness in ways that reshape civilization itself. Consider how this phenomenon fragments our shared understanding of truth. When everyone possesses their own personalized version of facts, genuine dialogue becomes impossible. We're not arguing over interpretations of reality, we're inhabiting entirely different realities. This isn't simply polarization, it's epistemic tribalism, where the methods by which we determine truth become badges of group identity. Your brain, bathed in constant information, develops what neuroscientists call cognitive miserliness, a tendency to conserve mental energy by relying on shortcuts. You adopt the conclusions of your trusted sources without examining their foundations. You pattern match rather than analyze. You outsource your critical thinking to those who confirm what you already believe. This isn't laziness, it's an adaptation to an information environment that would otherwise overwhelm you. But these adaptations exact a terrible price. The first casualty is your attention, not simply your ability to focus, but your capacity to direct your consciousness intentionally. The digital environment fragments attention into smaller and smaller units, training your neural pathways to resist sustained engagement with complex ideas. You become incapable of the very deep thinking required to combat the illusion of knowledge, creating a downward spiral of diminishing wisdom. The second casualty is your epistemological humility, your awareness of what you don't know. The more information you consume, the more your brain creates false memories of understanding. Psychological studies show that merely reading headlines creates the illusion of having read the article. Skimming summaries generates the sensation of comprehending the original work. Each simplified explanation you consume doesn't just fail to create expertise, it actively manufactures counterfeit expertise. The third, and perhaps most devastating casualty, is your agency. When the gap between what you believe you know and what you actually know grows wide enough, you become profoundly manipulable. Those who understand the mechanics of perception can insert themselves into this gap, shaping your understanding while leaving you with the illusion of independent thought. This is how minds are hacked, not by forcing false beliefs, but by exploiting the architecture of knowledge acquisition itself. Socially, this manifests as a crisis of expertise. When everyone feels equally qualified to evaluate complex topics from pandemic responses to economic policies to climate science, the foundations of functional governance crumble. We've created societies where genuine expertise struggles to distinguish itself from convincing performances of expertise, where subject matter mastery developed over decades carries no more weight than confidently delivered opinions developed over minutes. The confirmation bias that once helped our ancestors quickly identify threats now traps us in spirals of reinforcement. Each piece of information that confirms your existing belief strengthens your resistance to contradictory evidence. The algorithms that govern your information diet detect and amplify this tendency, creating feedback loops that transform initial leanings into unshakable convictions. Perhaps most troubling is what psychologists call the backfire effect. When presented with evidence that contradicts strongly held beliefs, many people don't revise their understanding, they double down. Their incorrect beliefs become stronger, not weaker. The very tools that should free us from ignorance paradoxically entrench it. This creates a society increasingly unable to solve complex problems. Climate change, pandemics, economic inequality. These challenges require not just information but integrated understanding. Not just awareness, but coordinated action based on shared reality. The illusion of knowledge fragments our collective capacity precisely when we need it most. You feel this fragmentation in your daily life, the exhaustion of navigating competing truth claims, the anxiety of constant informational FOMO, the creeping sense that perhaps you understand less than you once did, even as you consume more. These aren't incidental discomforts. They're symptoms of a profound epistemological crisis. Yet within this crisis lies the seed of transformation, a potential rebirth of how we relate to knowledge itself. Liberation begins with a radical act: intellectual surrender. Not the surrender of critical thinking, but the surrender of the illusion that you already know. The Buddhist concept of beginner's mind offers us the first key to breaking free, approaching each subject with the openness of one who has everything to learn, rather than the closed circuit of one who merely seeks confirmation. This rebellion against the illusion of knowledge isn't passive. It demands active resistance against the very architecture of information consumption that has shaped your cognitive patterns. Consider the counterintuitive path of deliberate ignorance, the strategic choice to narrow rather than expand your information intake. In a world designed to fracture your attention, concentration becomes an act of defiance. The philosopher Epictetus taught, "It is impossible to begin to learn that which you think you already know." Your path to genuine understanding starts by systematically identifying and dismantling your illusions of comprehension. Ask yourself, which of my strongly held positions would I struggle to explain to someone who disagrees? Which complex topics do I have opinions about despite never having engaged with serious counterarguments? These questions reveal the borders between genuine knowledge and its counterfeit. This rebellion requires new metrics for intellectual growth. Rather than measuring what you've consumed, measure what you've contemplated. Rather than tracking information encountered, track assumptions challenged. Rather than valuing exposure, value integration. These shifts transform information from a passive experience into an active dialogue between new inputs and your evolving understanding. Historical examples of this rebellion abound. Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, developed what we now call the Feynman technique, explaining complex concepts in language simple enough for a newcomer to understand. This process exposes the gaps in our assumed knowledge, the places where familiarity masquerades as comprehension. Socrates, through his method of questioning, revealed how quickly assumed knowledge collapses under examination. The practical rebellion begins with reclaiming your attention. Treat it as your most precious resource because it is. Create information consumption practices that privilege depth over breadth. Read books, not just excerpts. Follow complete arguments, not just conclusions. Engage with thinkers you disagree with at their strongest, not their weakest points. Seek primary sources rather than pre-digested summaries. Cultivate the courage to say, "I don't know," not as an endpoint, but as the beginning of authentic inquiry. This phrase, sincerely expressed, is not an admission of failure, but a declaration of intellectual honesty. It creates the space where genuine learning can occur. Consider adopting the practice of epistemic mapping, explicitly charting the foundations, sources, and limits of your knowledge on any given subject. This visual representation exposes the difference between areas of genuine understanding and areas of familiarity. It transforms your relationship with knowledge from unconscious consumption to conscious construction. The neuroscience of learning offers another path forward. Your brain strengthens neural pathways through repeated use. By deliberately engaging in slow, reflective thinking, what psychologist Daniel Kahneman calls System 2 inches cognition, you can literally reshape your neural architecture to resist the knowledge illusion. Like training a muscle, this process is initially uncomfortable, but grows easier with practice. This rebellion also means reclaiming your information environment. Curate your digital intake with the same care you would your physical nourishment. Design your technological ecosystem to serve your highest cognitive functions, not exploit your vulnerabilities. Create spaces of informational silence periods where you process and integrate rather than consume. These acts of rebellion aren't merely personal, they're political. In a world where attention is harvested and monetized, reclaiming yours disrupts systems designed to exploit cognitive vulnerabilities. By valuing depth over volume, contemplation over consumption, you help create alternative models of knowledge acquisition that might yet transform our collective relationship with information. But the greatest liberation lies beyond these practical steps, in a profound shift in how you conceptualize knowledge itself. The most profound liberation comes with a startling realization: true knowledge isn't a destination, it's a relationship. What if the entire framework through which you've understood knowledge is fundamentally flawed? What if knowledge isn't a possession to be acquired but a dynamic engagement with reality? This isn't semantic wordplay, it's a paradigm shift that transforms everything that came before. Consider how we speak about knowledge. We have it, we hold it, we acquire it, the language of ownership and accumulation. But what if genuine understanding isn't something you possess but something you practice? Not a static archive of facts, but a living, evolving dialogue between your consciousness and the world. The ancient Greeks distinguished between two forms of knowledge, episteme, theoretical knowledge and phronesis. The digital age has flooded us with the former while starving us of the latter. We've optimized for information retrieval while atrophying our capacity for integrated understanding. The existentialist philosopher Gabriel Marcel offers us the crucial distinction. Knowledge isn't a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be encountered. Problems can be held at arm's length, analyzed objectively, conquered through methodology. Mysteries, by contrast, involve us as participants. We cannot stand apart from them because we are implicated in them. The greatest subjects of human concern, consciousness, meaning ethics, beauty, aren't problems with solutions, but mysteries that invite endless exploration. This perspective transforms your relationship with not knowing. Uncertainty becomes not an enemy to be vanquished, but a field of infinite possibility. The edges of your understanding become not boundaries to be eliminated, but horizons that invite exploration. The question mark replaces the period as the most honest punctuation of consciousness. Ancient wisdom traditions across cultures have pointed to this truth. The Tao Te Ching tells us, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." This isn't a rejection of communication, but a recognition that the deepest understanding transcends easy articulation. It emerges through practice, embodiment, and direct experience, not merely through information transfer. This realization doesn't diminish the value of rigorous thinking or factual accuracy. Rather, it places them within a larger ecology of understanding, one that includes intuition, embodied knowing, emotional intelligence, and the wisdom that comes only through lived experience. It recognizes that the most profound truths are often paradoxical, holding contradictions that the rational mind struggles to reconcile. When you embrace this paradigm, you move from information consumer to meaning creator. You recognize that understanding isn't something that happens to you, but something you actively construct through engagement with ideas. You become not just a receiver of knowledge, but a participant in its creation. This shift doesn't just change how you think, it transforms how you live. The anxiety of keeping up with endless information dissolves. The compulsion to have an opinion on everything fades. The need to perform certainty loses its grip. In their place emerges a different relationship with reality, one characterized by curiosity rather than conclusion, exploration rather than acquisition, wonder rather than certainty. Imagine approaching each conversation not as an opportunity to demonstrate what you know, but as an invitation to discover what you don't. Imagine treating each disagreement not as a battle to be won, but as a window into a perspective you haven't fully comprehended. Imagine relating to knowledge not as a territory to conquer, but as a landscape to explore. This is the ultimate liberation from the illusion of knowledge, not simply adopting better information habits, but fundamentally reimagining what it means to know. This shift doesn't happen once, but must be practiced daily, a conscious rebellion against the defaults of our digital environment. And here lies the exquisite paradox. The moment you surrender the illusion of knowledge, you open yourself to understanding of a different order. Not the fragmented, disembodied information that characterizes the digital age, but an integrated wisdom that encompasses both knowing and being. Not the fleeting sensation of comprehension that comes from skimming surfaces, but the enduring insight that emerges from diving into depths. In the end, the question isn't how much you know, but how you know, not the volume of your information, but the quality of your attention. Not whether you're certain, but whether you're awake. The choice, as always, remains yours.